Shane Owens, a doctoral candidate here at Catholic University of America. Thank you to both professors. This is a question for both of you because I think there's a kind of common connection here. And I certainly agree. I study Augustine and theology of the episcopacy, which is my research topic, so I think a lot about these questions. But your point, Professor Gaillardi, on the strangeness of the auxiliary bishop being married to a church of, like, you know, some ancient Irish or North African church that no longer exists. And I think that spousal connection is obviously the kind of natural corollary to the paternal analogy that Dr. Pecknold talked about, because you're a spouse to be a father. And so kind of to both of you, because it touches on the spousal and the paternal character of mainly bishops in this case and less priests, the question I'm thinking about is the problem of the Episcopal Conference. Because you spoke about this kind of universalism that thinks of the college kind of as an entity in itself and doesn't think about the spousal or paternal character of the bishop. But it seems like the ability for bishops to push things off onto an Episcopal Conference can undermine their spousal or paternal character, that kind of unit of character. And I like a lot of the practical ways we can talk about this, but that this, you know, the Episcopal Conference undermining the paternal or spousal character of the Episcopal office. So to both of you, thank you.
I agree. This is something that I think is a temptation to sort of behave like a bureaucrat rather than a father or a spouse. I don't know what the solution is.
Well, I want to. I'm going to skip through so let me just, and I don't want to make a big deal of it. I'm probably a little bit more nervous than my colleague about such an exclusive reflection on paternity and so on and so forth. But I don't feel the need to dive into that right now. I want to address the question about Episcopal conferences, which in the realm of ecclesiology is a question that was raised in the wake of the Second Vatican Council and all sorts of concerns about the authority of Episcopal conferences that led to Apostolos Suos, excuse me. And, you know, some of the concerns you raised about Episcopal conferences were raised, of course, in the post-conciliar period. Noted ecclesiologists Henri de Lubac, Hans Urs von Balthasar, then Cardinal Ratzinger, whose own reflection seems to have shifted on this particular point. People tend to overemphasize the shifts in his thought, but I don't think there's much question. He gave a major address at Vatican II supporting a kind of understanding of intermediate embodiments of collegiality or participations in it that I think he walks away from a little bit later. That's an interesting question. To some extent, I'm not unsympathetic to your concerns. One of the classic concerns about relying on Episcopal conferences is that it's overly bureaucratized. When then Father Ratzinger gave his famous address while the council was still in question on collegiality, his appeal was to intermediate exercise of collegiality, in which he was speaking much more of provincial synods and councils. And so one of the things that I think we need to be doing is moving away from overemphasis on bureaucratized entities like Episcopal conferences and a retrieval, as Australia is doing, of the rather untapped provincial, plenary, and provincial councils, which I think are far more helpful for any number of reasons, but not the least of which because canonically there's provision for a greater participation of the entire people of God. So there are ways to affirm mediating levels of collegiality in the life of the church that are less bureaucratized, that would more reflect Pope Francis's call for our church to be more authentically synodal. I actually harbored the hope, to be honest, coming out of the 4-day conference that Pope Francis held with presidents of Episcopal conferences, that he would hold up Australia and say to the presidents, go back to your churches and come up with some mechanism, if it's not a plenary or provincial council, something like that, that is going to allow the people of God to give voice to their profound sense of alienation and so on and so forth, and to create a mechanism that is genuinely synodal. And, you know, his commitment to decentralization, or I would call an ecclesial principle of subsidiarity, makes him reluctant to kind of impose from on top universal solutions. But it would have been nice to have heard him encourage that a little bit more robustly, frankly. That may not be quite what you were talking about, but.
Thank you. I remember that after 2002, a number of American bishops proposed having a plenary council in the U.S., and that went nowhere.
I know.
That was dead on arrival, basically.
Right.
So that's a possible way forward.